How would Ranger fans feel if the team re-signed Keandre Miller, but only to a one-year contract?
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blueshirts fans, to episode number 1339 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, Jon Chik. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, and we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we got a lot to do here today. I want to throw out an idea that was actually suggested in a recent Larry Brooks article, and that is the concept of re-signing Keandre Miller, but only to a one-year contract. I think that could actually make some sense. I hesitate to say that, but I'll explain why in just a minute. Also going to be getting into the Rangers' decision to give away this year's first-round draft pick. The Penguins are now in possession of the number 12 overall pick, and the Rangers will, at least for now, hang on to their first-round pick for next season. I think that's the right decision. We'll explain why in a little bit. And also, the Rangers revealed their preseason schedule. 6 games starting in September. We'll talk about that as well. But let's start with Keandre Miller. And as I mentioned just a second ago, Larry Brooks threw out this idea that it is possible that the Rangers could re-sign Keandre Miller, but only to a one-year deal. Now, take it with a grain of salt, because right now, there's about a million different rumors floating around the NHL that a million different things are going to happen. And obviously, we know that they can't all happen. But that idea did kind of intrigue me, and it did get me thinking at least a little bit here. And it got me more specifically thinking why this might actually be the Rangers' best course of action when it comes to addressing lefty defensemen for this upcoming season. And this is why. To begin with, the Rangers have a lot of options when it comes to lefty defensemen, but I think just about all of them are not ideal, certainly not perfect. We'll run through them real quick here, and then I'll explain why I think Miller on a one-year deal could make some sense. First of all, I know a lot of Ranger fans listening to this, watching this, or otherwise just Ranger fans. They have the idea of the Rangers potentially going after Ivan Provorov or Vladislav Gavrikov in free agency. And I can certainly understand where they're coming from. If you're one of those fans that wants them to do something like that, I get it, because they could make this team better. My hesitancy with the two of those players is that I feel like they're both good defensemen, but not great defensemen, certainly not elite defensemen. And they're both about to get paid like they're Norris winners for a couple of reasons. To begin with, we know the salary cap is going up, and that's a good thing for the NHL and certainly for the Rangers, who are tight up against the salary cap seemingly at all times. But also, just the simple fact that I feel like these are two players that are destined to be overpaid in free agency, because when you look at the free agency landscape right now, you've got a situation where there's not really a whole lot in terms of lefty defensemen. And that being the case, teams are going to get desperate. Teams are going to start throwing around money to try to land one of their guys here, whether it's Provorov or Gavrikov. And in the case of the Rangers, it seems like there's a little bit more focus on Gavrikov right now as far as which one they seem to really be in on. We'll see how it goes, but I don't know, man. I mean, yes, they could both make the team better. I don't know that I like either one of them at the price that they're likely to command in this free agency class. You've got some in-house replacements that you could go with as well, but there are no obvious choices there. Urho Vakanainen, he's still in the fold. He's a lefty defenseman, but do we really want him playing next to Adam Fox at the start of the upcoming season? I mean, I guess you could do it, but that doesn't really seem ideal. I don't look at Vakanainen and say, yeah, first pair defenseman on opening night, let's go get it. I mean, I don't find Vakanainen at all if he's in the role of a 6th or 7th defenseman, but that's pushing it a little bit. If you're going to put a lot of eggs in the Vakanainen basket, you could re-sign DeHaan. He's a UFA. Not really holding my breath there. You could re-sign Zach Jones. That one could go either way. He's an RFA with arbitration rights, but we know the Rangers are very hesitant to give Zach Jones any kind of a significant role on this team. And even if they were to do that, I don't know that I like him as a top pair defenseman either. Matthew Robertson, I mean, he's played 2 games. Former second-round pick, but he's played 2 games for the Rangers and is now into his mid-20s. No great options in the minors, at the Wolfpack last season either. I mean, Jackson Dorrington, Connor Mackey, Brandon Scanlon, all those guys are still under contract. But again, none of them exactly scream first pair defenseman on opening night for the Rangers. And then there's another option that, as it pertains to Keandre Miller, you could pony up the dough and sign him long-term or sign him for 2 years at the very least. I don't really like that idea, though, because if I'm just being completely honest here, I was, we'll just say less than thrilled with what we saw from Keandre Miller this past season. Just too many mistakes, too many instances where just didn't seem to have his head in the game. And you could say that for a lot of players on this Ranger roster. I'm not just picking on Miller, but he was one of the culprits of that, issue this past season. So all of this leads us into what is maybe the final option. I mean, I feel like I just listed out just about everything that the Rangers could do, but there's this one thing left here. The aforementioned idea of the Rangers extending Keandre Miller, but doing so for only 1 year. And I think this would accomplish a couple of different things. For starters, the Rangers would not have to overextend themselves on Keandre Miller. Maybe they're at the point where they've seen enough good for Keandre Miller that they're not quite ready to let him go. They're not going to just trade him away to, some other team around the NHL. And he's their own homegrown guy, and maybe they still have some hope for him. And for that reason, they bring him back on just a 1-year deal, sort of a prove-it deal, right? You get 1 more year here, but you got to show us what you can do. And they don't have to commit beyond this upcoming season with Keandre Miller. Going this route, again, 1-year deal, it's another reason here that it could work, is that it could make Keandre Miller happy. Now, I don't know him personally. I don't know what his priorities are. I don't know if he's looking for, he was said to be seeking a significant raise on his next contract. That was a report that came out, I think early in 2025 was around when we started seeing those rumors. And if he can get it, all the more power to him. I don't really want the Rangers to give Miller a massive long-term expensive contract extension right now. But would this make Miller happy if they were to give him a 1-year deal on a high average annual value? Sign him for a pretty significant raise, maybe like $5 million or so. $5 million or $5.5 million, whatever it might be, that could end up being more in a 1-year deal than Miller would get per season if he were to sign a multi-year extension. We know how this works. Typically, the longer a contract is, the less money it ends up being per season because you can spread the money out a little bit. And that's what we've seen with players. Like when the Rangers signed Vincent Trocheck, I think that's kind of the road that they went down. It's a very long-term deal. And I think they did that, part of the reason at least, to keep the average annual value as manageable as possible. And you could see something like that, rather the opposite of it, with Miller here. We saw something very similar with Ryan Lindgren last offseason. We didn't know which way that was going to go, and they end up signing him to a 1-year deal, and I think it was $4.5 million, which again, probably more than Lindgren would have gotten per season had he signed a multi-year extension. So maybe that would work for Keandre Miller and his camp. I'm not really sure. It all depends what his priorities are. Another reason, though, why I like the idea of a 1-year extension, in theory, it keeps Keandre Miller hungry for this upcoming season because he still hasn't gotten his long-term big-time payday. He'll get a raise, no doubt about that, but it won't be for long-term. And as far as Miller and how he played last year, it didn't always look to me like this was a guy that knew that he was playing for his next contract. Miller this past season, it was the last year of his contract, his 2-year extension that he had signed with the Rangers. So I don't know. Something just seemed to be missing. And I worry if you do sign Keandre Miller to a long-term deal, forget about his play slipping this past season, but is that fire going to go out? Is he really going to be motivated? Because if this is what we got from him last season, when he knew he needed a new contract, then I don't want to give him 5, 6, 7 years of security with the Rangers, knowing full well that he might take his foot off the gas a little bit. We saw that seemingly with Alexis Lafreniere last season. I don't need to see it again with Keandre Miller. So a 1-year deal would, in theory, keep him hungry because he's still playing for his next contract, which would be the season after this upcoming season. And the big one for me, this might be the biggest reason I saved this for last, the biggest reason why I like a 1-year deal with Keandre Miller is that you don't have to overcommit to one of the UFA defensemen, like I mentioned, and you also don't overcommit to Keandre Miller. And what this all adds up to is you have significantly more cap space next offseason when we've got some unbelievable free agents. Kempe, Robertson, Connor McDavid, just to name a few. And I've mentioned this before. I realize any of those players could, in theory, re-sign with their current team between now and then. But the free agency class next offseason is just wild. And I don't want there to be a situation where the Rangers can't sign one of those players I just mentioned because, oh, whoops, we gave too much money to Keandre Miller. Or, oh, whoops, we gave too much money to Vladislav Gavrikov, right? So for all those reasons, and that's the big one for me, I want to keep the books as clean as possible for next offseason when the Rangers can really go in. They'll have a bunch of cap space. Panarin's contract will be off the books by then, and you can go out and get, a big-time superstar player in this league, a big-time difference maker, a big-time impact player for the New York Rangers. So in conclusion, as far as a perfect solution, there isn't one. Unless you guys come up with something really creative here that I haven't thought of, I can't, for the life of me, figure out an ideal, perfect situation when it comes to left defenseman for the Rangers this upcoming season. I didn't love how Keandre Miller played this last season. I'm sure some of you are in the same boat right with me on that. There's part of me that wants the Rangers to trade Keandre Miller because they just gave away their first-round pick this year. I think you can get it right back by trading Keandre Miller to, some team in the NHL. I do think you can get a first-rounder for him. But again, I don't like the idea of the Rangers paying an astronomical amount of money to one of these UFA defensemen or to Keandre Miller himself. And I love the idea of the Rangers having cap space for next year's free agency class. I think that's really important, and you can land a big-time superstar player, next offseason if you have the funds to do so. Because players still want to play for the New York Rangers. We're lucky in that regard that players still want to come here, and that's all well and good, but you got to make sure you have the cap space to make it happen. So those are my thoughts on Miller. I do kind of like the idea of a one-year contract for Keandre. It's not perfect, but I think it beats several of the alternatives. In just a second, going to shift our attention to something that we touched on just briefly a second ago here, and that is the Rangers making the decision to give away the number 12 pick to the Penguins in this year's draft. Going to have some thoughts on that, and more specifically, why I think it was the right call. We will do that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can be. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full control and visibility over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It is a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you are also building wealth. It's very easy to get caught in a situation where we've all been there. You check your bank account and the money's down a little bit. Certain expenses have added up. You go on a vacation with your family. You go out to eat once or twice. You go to a Rangers game. You do this activity or that activity, whatever it might be. We've all been there from time to time when the expenses just seem to add up a little bit. Bottom line, take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off of your first year. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Big shout out to the everydayers, as always, for sticking with this podcast through thick and thin and all the ups and downs that it entails to be a New York Ranger fan. Feels to me like the Rangers are going to do something big before the draft. I don't know exactly what it's going to be. We talked about the concept of trading for Jason Robertson in the last episode. If you want my thoughts on that, you can go back and check that out. It feels like they might have something up their sleeve. We will see. But if that happens, obviously we'll be all over it. We'll obviously cover the draft itself, which will occur on Friday night and pretty much all day on Saturday. And then free agency occurs at noon on Tuesday, and we might even do a live show for that. I think we probably will do that. So looking forward to all that good stuff. But for right now, let's put the focus on this big decision that Chris Drury and the Rangers had to make, whether or not to give away this year's first-round pick or keep it and give away next year's unprotected pick. And that's a question that's been lingering for quite some time here in Rangerland. And anyone who needs a refresher, I'll just run through it real quick here, give you the timeline of the events. Rangers swung a trade for JT Miller during midseason. In that trade, the Canucks acquired the Rangers' first-round draft pick. The Canucks then subsequently traded that pick to the Pittsburgh Penguins in a separate deal, so that pick now belongs to the Penguins. Also of note, this first-round pick that the Rangers sent to the Canucks and eventually went to the Penguins, it was top 13 protected, which basically means that if the Rangers were to pick in the top 13 this season, it would be protected. And what that means is that the Rangers would then have the option to keep the pick this year or to give it away and keep their pick next year. Because if they kept this year's pick, then they would have to give away next year's first-round pick. And in that case, it would be unprotected. So the Rangers, if they end up picking first in next year's draft or second or fifth or 10th or last or whatever it is, that pick would automatically go to the Pittsburgh Penguins. And it sparked a lot of debate among Ranger fans, and understandably so. It's certainly a big decision, and it becomes an even bigger decision, I think, once that pick no longer belongs to the Canucks and belongs to the division rival Penguins. My understanding is that the Rangers had until Wednesday night to let the NHL know what they were going to do. They made their decision and made it public on Tuesday morning. And that all begs the question as to whether or not this was the correct call. I would say yes. At the beginning of this whole debate, and it's been going on for quite some time now, I thought it was a no-brainer to give away this year's pick. And then the more I thought about it, the more it became like, I don't know, a little bit more toward 50-50, but I still lean toward this being the correct decision. I've never really wavered on that. I'm going to explain all the reasons why I think this is the correct decision, but I want to actually start, because there might be some who don't agree with me, and that's okay. I want to start by looking at the one reason why I think you could make a decent case to be against it. And it's because, on the surface, it appears that giving away this year's pick, number 12, and hanging on to next year's pick, to be determined where they pick next year, is a vote of no confidence in this upcoming season. Because when you look at the Rangers have done recently, they've borderline gutted their roster. I mean, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but there's been more overturned for the Rangers, I would say, in the past year than maybe in the past 3 years before that combined. Because at least in terms of like big time impact, important players to the New York Rangers, big name players, there's always guys that, come in at the trade deadline, or they sign a 1-year deal with the Rangers in free agency, and they're on their way in short order. But in terms of guys that, were either building blocks or veterans or leaders of this team, yeah, there's been more significant moves made by the Rangers in this past year than 3 previous seasons before that. So this all begs the question. You've made all these moves, and if you're Drury and you like everything you've done here, and you've retooled this roster, and you've revamped it, and okay, we're ready to go. This is the team that I want to move forward with, and we're going to be a contender again. If you've done all that, and you believe all that, then why are you afraid of the Penguins having a high draft pick next offseason, right? Because the only way the Penguins could have a high draft pick in next year's draft is if the Rangers, once again, essentially bleep the bed and essentially have another terrible season. Because if the Rangers make the playoffs this upcoming season, then the Penguins will be picking in the second half of the draft, and it's not, all that high of a draft pick, and there's nothing to be worried about. And, giving away this year's pick, it does kind of leave you with that idea that maybe the Rangers aren't so sure about how this next season is going to go. And maybe they're not as confident in this group as they're professing to be. And with that being the case, they want to make sure that if they do have a bad season next year, that the Penguins don't get a really, really high pick, in the top 5 or whatever it might be. So that's the one reason you can make against the Rangers giving away this year's pick, is because it can be construed, I think, as a lack of confidence in what this team can do this upcoming season. But here are several reasons why I think it was the right decision. And there's a few here. Going to start with the first and the simplest reason. Next year's draft class is better. And that's not me saying that. That's me going by what appears to be basically a unanimous consensus among scouts and draft experts and whatnot. Basically, everybody seems to believe, and strongly believe, that next year's draft class is frankly just better than this year's draft class. And with that being the case, that means that if you're going to hang on to one first-round pick or the other one, you'd want it to be next year's first-round pick, right? I mean, that's just common sense. But yeah, I mean, it seems like it's a universal belief that next year's draft class is better. And number 12 pick this year, I mean, that's nothing to sneeze at. You should be able to get a really good player at number 12. But that also might mean that the number 12 pick this year is equivalent to, say, like the number 20, number 21 pick next year. I don't know the exact, equivalency between those two picks, right? The two draft classes. But if next year's draft class is deeper, it stands to reason that, the number 12 pick this year might be about the same as picking in the late teens, the early 20s next offseason. So I think for those reasons, again, it does make sense. Next draft class is simply better. Second reason here that I'm going to throw out there, giving away the number 12 pick this year and hanging on to your pick for next year is what we're going to call disaster insurance. And I know I just got done talking about how, Chris Drury, if he truly believes in this team, then he shouldn't be scared of the Penguins getting a high draft pick next year, because the only way that can happen is if the Rangers have a bad season this upcoming year. And that is all true. But we got to face facts here. The Rangers just had one of the most miserable seasons in franchise history. And honestly, we have no idea how next season is going to go. I mean, you never know for sure, whether you're a Ranger fan or anybody else. You can have high hopes or low expectations for this season or that season, and then the exact opposite happens. We've all been there as Ranger fans. We've seen them greatly exceed expectations. We've seen them fall light years short of expectations. This most recent season certainly comes to mind. But again, it's disaster insurance, because what if everything just goes horribly wrong again next season, right? Let's say the Rangers just kind of stumble out of the starting blocks and Mike Sullivan just can't get anything out of these guys, and there's no connection there, and some of the bad feelings from last year kind of spill into this year. That could happen. I'm more hopeful than that. I do think the Rangers are going to be quite a bit better this upcoming season than they were this last one. I mean, they've got a new coach, and I do think they've retooled this roster to some degree, and I think they'll continue to do that moving forward here. But I mean, last season was a mess. And if that were to happen again this season, and the Rangers were terrible again, and they're, at the bottom of the standings or near the bottom of the standings, we would have to deal with that. Plus also knowing that the Penguins have our first round draft pick for next offseason. And that just cannot happen. That is a complete disaster. So the safer thing to do here, even though, again, I mentioned the vote of no confidence that it implies, the safer thing to do here is to give away the number 12 pick this year and have the number whatever pick that you're going to have next year. It is the safer play, almost undeniably. Third reason why I think you hang on or you give away this year's pick, the upcoming trade deadline for this next season. This reason, unlike the last one, entails that the Rangers turn things around this upcoming season and they end up having a much better campaign than they did this past season. And I think that is likely to happen. I think the Rangers will be better this upcoming season than certainly they showed this past season. And if that's the case, then they still need to have a first-round pick, or it would certainly behoove them to have a first-round pick going into the trade deadline next season. Because at that point, you can't trade a first-round pick if you don't have one, right? And the fact that the Rangers gave away this year's first-round pick, they still have next year's first-round pick. And if we get to the trade deadline, the Rangers are contending, they're having a great season, and they need to try to add a big-time impact player at the deadline, you now have the first-round pick still available to you to do so. So that would be nice. And, in such a scenario, here's the other thing. If you trade away the first-round pick at next year's deadline, then you don't have to worry about it being a high overall pick, because if you're trading away your first-round pick at the deadline, then clearly you're buying because you're contending, and that first-round pick won't end up being all that high. It'll be in the second half of the first round, and it obviously is not as valuable when that is the case. So there's that to consider as well. And I'll throw out one more reason here, the fourth reason, probably the least important of all the reasons, if I'm being completely honest here, but nothing to sneeze at either. The possibility of the Rangers extending an offer sheet to an RFA. If the Rangers choose to offer sheet someone wherein a first-round pick is part of the compensation, they would then have a first-round pick to be able to do that. You can't offer sheet somebody if you don't have a first-round pick, at least not at that compensation level. So that's important as well. I saw the Larry Brooks article. He doesn't seem to think the Rangers are going to offer sheet anybody. We always think it's going to be the year of the offer sheet, and then it never happens. I'm as guilty of it as anybody, but it is nice to have that in your back pocket as well if that's a move that you want to make, this offseason here. So it's a reason. I don't think it's really the reason. So again, with all that said, I think it's the right call. It's the safer move. You have a first-round pick in next year's draft class if you want to hang on to it and use it, and you can also flip it at the deadline if need be. So again, I think it's the right call. So far, so good this offseason for Chris Drury and the Rangers. I know a lot of us are still holding our breath, and there's some things they still got to get right, but I think we're doing okay so far, and I do like this decision. In just a second, we're going to shift our attention to the release of the Rangers preseason schedule. It's not quite the regular season, but it's something. It gives us a target for New York Ranger hockey, and I'm definitely looking forward to that, and we're going to break down the schedule and share it with all you guys in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Rugiet. You've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, on average, in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. You can even read real customer reviews on their site It's helping a lot of people feel more confident and present in the moment. Head to Rugiet.com/LockedOnNHL and use code LockedOnNHL to get 15% off today. That's Rugiet.com/LockedOnNHL and use promo code LockedOnNHL for 15% off. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers with the big preseason schedule review. You know, it's not quite the regular season, but it is nice to have a target date for when we get to see the New York Rangers back in action. I know some of us are kind of enjoying the break right now, myself included. You know, there's seasons that end and you can't wait to get back out there. And then there's other seasons where you kind of enjoy the offseason a little bit. And for me, at least, it's the latter, because this Ranger team, I think, drove us all a little nuts this past season. And by the time we get into July, August, certainly September, I'll be ready for Ranger hockey. But for right now, at least, I certainly am enjoying the break. But with all that said, yes, the Rangers did release their preseason schedule. For those of you on YouTube, I'm going to share it on the screen right now. And for those of you on audio, do not worry. I'm going to talk you through it. So there it is for anybody that's on YouTube. 6 games against 3 different opponents, 2 games against each of those opponents. And again, I'll just kind of walk you through it. The first game of the Ranger preseason schedule, this is the one you want to circle on your calendars because obviously, again, it's the start of New York Ranger hockey. That will be occurring on Sunday, September 21st at 1 p.m. on the road against the New Jersey Devils. And that's just great. Do it on NFL Sunday, right in the middle of the afternoon when the Giants and Jets are probably playing. That's just fantastic. Make sure nobody notices it, I guess is what the Rangers are going for. And to be fair, I didn't even check the NFL schedule, but I would imagine between the Giants and the Jets and the NFL in general, I don't know that that's the best day to do it. But be that as it may, that's when the Rangers start, and that's what I'm going to be watching on that day. Then you've got September 23rd. The Rangers are at home against the Bruins at 7 p.m. And then September 25th at home against the Islanders at 7 p.m. Then on September 29th at the Islanders at 7 p.m., and then on October 2nd, at home against the Devils on 7 p.m. And then finally, they conclude on October 4th on the road against the Bruins at 2 p.m. So 6 games, I think it's a good number. You'll see a good mix of, veteran players, young guys trying to make the team. It's a good time to keep, obviously, an eye on all the position battles that might be going on in Ranger training camp. And I'm certainly looking forward to seeing the Rangers back in action. I'm not quite there yet, but I certainly will get there as it pertains to Ranger hockey. The other bit of news here is kind of to explain that there is no news on this front, but the Rangers and Flyers, they've been doing this the last couple seasons, a combined rookie camp. The way it usually works is I think the rookie camp lasts for about 6 or 7 days for the Rangers, and they do their own thing, do the Rangers, but then they head over to the Philadelphia area. I want to say Allentown, Pennsylvania, and they take the ice against the Flyers rookies for 2 games, and they play games just like they would. You know, it's very similar to, any normal regular season game action that you might see. And I always really enjoy it. We don't always know if the Rangers are going to stream it, but the Flyers usually do. So in most cases, there's a way to watch those games. I haven't seen anything confirmed about those happening, but I'm looking forward to those as well. Like I said, it's a great chance for different young players to establish themselves. 2 standouts from this past year's rookie camp include Adam Edstrom and Victor Mancini. And both of them, at least somewhat surprisingly, made the Rangers on opening night. Mancini ended up getting traded as part of the JT Miller deal, but that's neither here nor there. He obviously impressed the Rangers and earned a roster spot on opening night. So it's awesome. I really enjoy it, and hoping they're doing that as well. And if they do announce a schedule for that, we'll be all over it, and we'll let you guys know. I mentioned Mancini a second ago. He is actually now, as of a couple days ago, a Calder Cup champion. The Abbotsford Canucks, a couple of days ago, won the Calder Cup championship, and they defeated the Charlotte Checkers in 6 games in the final. The Checkers are the AHL team of the Florida Panthers, which that's fantastic. I mean, you look at the Panthers right now, and you see how loaded they are, and it feels like they could rule the NHL for a couple more years going forward. And apparently their AHL team is really, really good too. They were in the finals, but they lost to the Canucks, obviously the AHL team of the Vancouver Canucks. But again, most of the reason I bring this up is that Mancini did win the Calder Cup championship. Mancini last year, he ended up technically playing for 4 different teams. He had 15 games with the Rangers, 23 games with the Wolfpack, 16 games with the Vancouver Canucks, and then 7 regular season games with the Abbotsford Canucks, and then finally 24 playoff games with the Abbotsford Canucks. And in those 24 games, Mancini had 3 goals, 5 assists, and was a -6 in that time. So good for him. Good for him winning a championship. Very cool to see former Ranger succeeding, and curious to see how his career unfolds. I still think it was worth it to bring back JT Miller, but Mancini impressed, the little amount of time that he spent with the New York Rangers. One other thing I want to throw out there before we call it a day here, and it's something that I mentioned very briefly during one of those episodes that we're going to auto-publish when I was going on vacation. Stefan Matteau, Game 7 overtime stories. Feel free to send them my way. We've done this in the past with different, Ranger overtime playoff moments. We did a round for Artemi Panarin. We did one for Derek Stepan. They both scored Game 7 overtime winners. And then last year, the Rangers won 4 playoff games in overtime. So we kind of combined those all together, and you guys sent me those stories. What we're going to do is collect stories on Stefan Matteau, the Game 7 overtime winner, and I will share those stories in a future episode of Locked On New York Rangers, a little bit deeper into the offseason once all the dust settles on, free agency and the draft and all that good stuff. But looking forward to hearing some of your stories. I realize some of you are too young to even participate in this one, but those of you that are old enough would love to hear your stories on where you were, what you were doing, who you were with, when Stefan Matteau sent Ranger fans into an absolute frenzy in Game 7 overtime, double overtime against the New Jersey Devils. So, yep, we'll call it there. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @JChik17. Once again, @JCHIK17. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.